right. Hey, everybody. Here we are today at the Energy News Beat podcast, and I have a very, very special guest today, Jesse Mercer, and he is with Enverus, and he is the Senior Director, Crude Marketing Analytics for Enverus. Hey, welcome, Jesse. We sure are glad you're here.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Hey, and I'll tell you what, Enverus is just an absolute wonderful company. Know a lot of people over there. They know data. So you ever need data, you guys are definitely the place over there. And Jesse, you said you've been at Enverus about 2 years. Is that right?
That's right. I came over from Phillips 66 originally.
Oh, yes, in the Houston office, right?
That's right.
All right.
Crude oil strategy.
Oh, cool. How do you like living in Houston?
Houston's a great town. I love it. I'm not originally from there, so happened to find the city actually quite nice. I'm now in Denver, which is also an excellent place to live.
I'd rather pick Denver. Everybody says it's a wet heat down in Houston, and you die when you walk outside, right? So anyway.
Yeah, my glasses fog up every time I step outside of the grocery store in Houston. You don't get that so much in the dry air here in the mountains.
No, I love Denver. Hey, a couple things. You just had a report come out with a delicate balance, and you had some really important feedback on this. And as we go through this, Enverus, we just said means data. And when I was going through this report, there's some way big, cool nuggets in this report. And if you wouldn't mind, just give me a little bit of an overview of how you guys do your reports and how it makes up a report, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. Well, Enverus is more than just data. We're also a software as a solution company, software as a service company. Sorry, we're focusing on high tech insights and predictive analytics, empower our customers to make decisions that increase their profits. So it's not just hard data, not just a shop for data, but we're also developing some very highly technologically advanced tools as well, and we use them in all of our products, as well as all our research reports, publications. There's a saying, you eat your own dog food, and we do exactly that. We put our money where our mouth is, and we use our products in all this analysis. The Fundamental Edge report comes out every month, but we do a deep dive every quarter on the global market fundamentals, but also with a particular eye on the United States and what the global fundamentals mean for the U.S., in particular for operators here, as well as for other market participants in the midstream and downstream space.
Oh, cool. I noticed that when I was prepping for this interview that you had some stuff in here in Iran. We'll go through that here in a little bit. So when you talk about knowledge for the U.S., you guys consider the whole marketplace around the world when you're looking at that kind of stuff. So pretty impressive on that. When you take a look at crude oil and then gas, we also kind of hinted on our early prep on this for the Colonial Pipeline. Holy cow. Can you imagine the hackers coming in and saying, hey, by the way, and then taking a 5,000 mile pipe out? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's I'm actually surprised it didn't happen sooner, to be honest with you, because it doesn't take a whole lot of effort anymore to get studied up on the U.S. Oil and refined products pipeline systems. There's some great blogs out there you can follow on a daily basis where they outline these systems in detail. And so if I suppose this was a criminal gang and not an extension of a Russian intelligence agency,
right?
Have some doubts about them being just entirely in the criminal enterprise and not somehow being state-backed.
Right.
But they wouldn't have to do a large study on where our weaknesses are in terms of our energy system. And Colonial was a great example of that. This is what happens when we become increasingly, when the refining industry becomes increasingly concentrated, in a few areas, and where the key markets are dependent on, one or a small number of major arteries for fuels into the state. And we saw a deep, extreme case of this in the Southeast. New York and New York Harbor, the Northeast, they fared a bit better because they have some local refining capacity. They get a little bit of refined products, in from the Midwest as well through a couple pipelines from across Pennsylvania. And of course, there's that St. John refinery over in Canada, and that's they're constantly bringing in material into the Northeast. But Southeast was an energy desert essentially, and and technically there was enough refined product on hand, but you get people scared and they they want to protect their families, protect themselves. They go out and they fill up, gas cans, and they run down the storage, the tertiary storage that's held at fueling stations. And the tanker trucks, they only carry about 8,000 gallons each.
Yep.
There's only so much good you can do, and we had a truck driver shortage because so many were laid off last year when demand collapsed. So it was like a perfectly timed, targeted strike in a way.
Wow.
The hackers involved, dark side, they claim that next time they'll do a better social impact study or something like that of their crimes. But these are folks that shut down hospitals and schools and police departments and things like that too. So don't believe them on that one.
Oh no.
You know what? Colonial was just an extreme case. The Northeast, Southeast. But there are cities out west. Phoenix. Tucson. They're supplied by one pipeline out of California.
Yes, and I saw. Speaking of the dark side, I saw actually one quote from the dark side, and it was kind of funny. He said, they said in there saying, next time we sell our virus software or our hacker software, we'll be more mindful that we don't sell it to Russians. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. That's so silly. They were now trying to divert, saying that they sold the hacker software. I thought that was a good funny. But the memes came out of that wild. And that is, I saw people filling up with trash bags and everything else. And it was just
people here in Denver doing that.
Filling up in trash bags?
Garbage cans.
Oh, garbage can. Oh my gosh. That is.
But it also showed, frankly, just how little we as Americans know about where our energy comes from.
Right.
And the supply chain issues. We really should be, more knowledgeable of these things, and where we get our fuels from. I think this was a good opportunity for Americans to really learn about that and understand truly just how dependent we are on fossil fuels.
I saw an interesting comment that somebody said that why don't we have oil refineries closer to everything, and we need to go ahead and build new refineries so that they're smaller and closer. And I'm kind of like, they won't let us build a pipeline. How in the world are they going to let us build a refinery? So
it's also reversing, a 40-year trend towards consolidation in the refining sector. Increasing the economies of scale to reduce the marginal cost of production. And so we've seen, the heavy concentration of refining capacity, around Houston, Beaumont, Port Arthur, Lake Charles, southern Louisiana. We got a little bit, in that little corridor between Philadelphia and New Jersey. Chicago's got a good bit packed in there. California's an island. It has all its own refineries are right there. No pipelines going in. So we kind of doing that right now. That's been the trend over the last 40 years. Georgia at one time had a small asphalt plant that also produced diesel. They shut that down a couple of years ago when the Venezuelans backed out of a supply contract with them, and they couldn't economically source heavy crude oil from Canada by rail.
Right.
And so, at one time, we actually did have refineries. There was like 3 in New York and 5 in Ohio, and they were all over the place, except the Southeast. We had mostly asphalt plants there. But at one time we did have refineries, in around most major metropolitan areas. And today we went with a heavily concentrated refining industry with large long haul pipeline systems carrying those products out to far-flung markets across the continent. There's that Colonial Pipeline to the northeast and the entire eastern seaboard. You're going up the Midwest, there's the Magellan system coming up from the Gulf Coast and spreading out. We get some of our fuel here in the Denver area from that, as well as from 2 refineries in northern Texas, Borger and McKee. There's a couple pipelines running up here. So that's why you see so many Phillips 66 stations, for example, in the Denver market, is because we had that direct shot up from that Borger pipeline.
So what are your thoughts?
Concentration is the trend.
What are your thoughts on new pipelines? As we sit here and we need that infrastructure, and then the cancellation and the Keystone and the Line 5 mess. I mean, holy cow! How are we going to get new pipelines is a whole nother animal, isn't it?
Yeah, the outlook for new pipelines is going to be very challenging. And Line 5 is a completely different issue. Shutting down that's a strategic artery for crude oil, and it doesn't really affect us Americans that much. But boy, it sure affects the Canadians in Quebec and Ontario. Because
Right.
without Line 5, you're not going to have the refineries in Sarnia
Right.
or Quebec or Montreal running. And because of environmental opposition, it doesn't look like we're going to be able to get that Montreal, the Portland to Montreal pipeline,
Right.
back up and running again. It's basically moving a barrel a day or something like that. It's really small because they're not really getting any volume anymore.
Right.
And you can't get 200,000 barrels a day down the St. Lawrence River.
Right.
That's a big problem there. You get some congestion. But yeah, that would cause a major energy crisis in the industrial heartland of Canada, and would also
Right.
affect consumers of refined products in some northeastern U.S.
Yep.
states like Vermont and New Hampshire and northern Maine. So those are things
Wow.
that we really have to think about these long-term, these knock-on effects of shutting down a major artery
Yep.
like Line 5.
That I saw in there, the job impact on the U.S. was, I believe, 33,000 estimated with Line 5 being shut down. 33,000 jobs in 4 states. And I was like, holy cow. I mean, that's a lot of jobs if that thing got shut down. So, it would make more sense if a governor's not shutting that down and having wouldn't that be an international kind of thing for the administration to deal with? Just a thought.
Well, Gretchen Whitmer, I believe she lacks the authority to actually shut that pipeline down, and so it's going to be up to PHMSA. It's going to be up to the federal government to
Right.
determine that. And I don't think the Biden administration has any appetite in
No.
strangling our closest neighbor and ally of petroleum fuels, because that's going to cripple their economy.
Right.
And it would hit us back too pretty hard.
Oh, you bet. And Jesse, those are all excellent points on that. When we take a look at the gas prices coming up for this holiday weekend with the Colonial, those are probably going to go through the roof because we did have a big draw on things just this past week and things. So what are your thoughts on just the gas? Is it going to come back out around in price? Is it going to go up? Do you think, just as a ballpark guess there?
Yeah, there are a number of factors going on aside from just Colonial. Of course, Colonial is going to have, localized impacts in the markets on the East Coast, and like I said before, particularly in the Southeast, where you don't
Right.
have very many other options for resupply. No other real incremental swing volumes that can quickly come into that region and resupply them. So retail prices in that region may be more elevated than in others. The Colonial pipeline is back up and running. It takes them about 15 days to get gasoline up to the Northeast, about 19 days to get diesel because it's more dense. They're going to have to replenish inventories, and we have summer driving season coming up here too. So people are going to want to get out. They're going to want to go places, see the world. International travel is still a bit iffy. Jet fuel demand is still a bit weak. We don't really see that recovering until maybe the fourth quarter of 2023, because it's easier to ease up on domestic travel restrictions than it is to ease up on international ones, especially when you have bubbles
Right.
around certain countries where you can't enter unless you're part of that bubble, or you have a vaccine passport or something in place, and then there's still quarantine restrictions, and nobody wants to sit 2 weeks in a hotel room before they even step out of the and actually enjoy their vacation. So people are going to be getting in their cars and driving a lot more this summer, so we have higher demand. While at the same time, refinery throughput is still pretty low. It's about 2 million barrels a day below where we were before the pandemic hit. And so that has impacted gasoline supply. If you look at gasoline cracks, okay, take the blip during the Colonial shutdown out for a second here. Go back to where we were, but right before then, and go where we think we're heading. In the summer, we're looking at gasoline cracks that are pretty strong, around $25 a barrel.
Right.
That's pretty good for a refiner. And so we've been seeing refining margins, strengthen back up again since the Colonial shut down. You got to think of that when the East Coast is not getting gasoline, that means the gasoline and diesel that's being produced in the Gulf Coast doesn't have anywhere to go. So we started seeing refiners floating extra supplies off Mexico. So that really hit them pretty hard then. But things are going to get back to normal here. But refineries around the world are not running at their pre-COVID levels. And that's had widespread impacts across the value chain, not just for fuels, but for a lot of the things that we use in our everyday lives. Everyone's been tracking, the price of lumber has been going up, and it was like $600 per 1,000 board feet 6 months ago, and now we're looking at $1,700. I had a plan I wanted to redo my deck this year. I'm not doing that. It's absolutely insane. But PVC prices, they spiked too. Polypropylene, polyethylene.
Right.
It's hard to get many the basic materials that we use in our everyday lives. Things like pens and chewing gum, things like that. So if you look at that, that producer price index for plastics and resins, since May of last year, it's gone up 40%, just because the feedstocks that go into the refining, go into the petrochemical plants, and they turn these things into these wonderful polymers that we use all the time. Well, it's gotten very tight, and some facilities had to shut down.
So the impact to the end user is prices on everything are going to go up.
Yes. I can affirm that. You know what? We had that freeze off in that heavy freeze in Texas back in February, and that really did a number on our petrochemical industry. We're still trying to bring up facilities that were shut down because of lack of power. It takes a long time to get those facilities up and running because of the risks involved in restarting from a cold start.
That's a good, Jesse. That's a good
Sherwin-Williams, the paint manufacturer, had to shut down a plant in Texas because they couldn't get the raw components they need to make paint. So you're going to go out and paint your house this summer, for example. It's going to cost more than it did last year. Automotive manufacturers, Honda, Toyota, they slowed down their manufacturing of cars in North America because they use a lot of plastics and polymers in the interior of your car, the underhood sound dampening, all that stuff is synthetic material. The tires on your car, that's made from butadiene. That's not rubber, that's butadiene. That comes from butane. So we actually make that stuff, and when the petchem facilities aren't running, not at their full capacity, and then that's going to hit our supply chains everywhere.
Boy, this is kind of frightening almost. I've got a team building event, and we're building a shed this weekend. I bet it's going to be a $5,000 shed.
It probably is going to be a bit more shocking than prior projects you may have built.
Jesse, you brought a fantastic point up about floating storage. And our buddies over in Iran have been very entertaining over the last several years. And they've been planning, and they've done a great job preparing for the sanctions and those kind of things, and getting that contract with China for 25 years and all that kind of stuff. In the report, you had a slide on Iran's numbers there as well, too. Can you tell me what your opinion is on some of the production coming around on that, or does that make sense?
Yeah, sure. So, they're currently at about 2.4, close to 2.5 soon million barrels a day of current production.
Right.
If we have an agreement to, restore the major principles of the, 2015 nuclear deal, they could ramp up their production to somewhere around 400,000 barrels a day by the end of next year. It's just a matter of timing. It's kind of hard to predict precisely when barrels hit the market. But like I said, they have that floating storage. They can put that into the market really fast, most likely heading into China or to India. But over time, it will eventually have some impact on oil prices. It's just a matter of timing. I think we're pretty good this summer because we're going to be kind of starting out at a low point, raising it gradually over the fall. We see oil prices, this over the third quarter, WTI averaging around $68 a barrel, Brent averaging somewhere around 72. But then you get to the first quarter of next year, the Iranians are back up to that 4 million barrels a day, and OPEC Plus has been dialing back their production cuts. Something's got to give. And that's a low demand period in the first quarter. Typically you see, things drop off around then.
Wow.
And so I don't know if the OPEC Plus group is going to be completely complacent while prices start to drop again. They want to exit this deal, but they may not have the opportunity to do so.
Wow. So OPEC coming back up, speaking of OPEC, coming around the corner here. Do you think the Saudis are going to increase theirs? I've got a bet on it that they're not going to take any more cuts. Just as a friendly wager there, I got a $1 bet on it. So, I'm a high dollar investor there. That they are going to claim some of their cuts back. They've pretty well done a number, and they were putting out some hints that demand's coming back, so they're okay to go ahead and release some of increase their productions. Are you going to be on that dollar bet?
Well, I think they are right, actually, that demand is coming back. We're expecting about 5.4 million barrels a day of global demand growth this year versus last year. Now, keep in mind, last year we lost 8.7, so we're not going to be back to pre-COVID levels this year. In fact, it's probably going to be around 2023 when that happens. But the Saudis, they essentially carried OPEC plus this last 6 months. They made an extra voluntary cut of 1 million barrels a day, just essentially to keep the Russians at the table. And the Russians, meanwhile, have been wanting to increase their production. And if we got the Iranian barrels coming back onto the market, putting pressure on prices, the Saudis are going to start getting testy again with the Russians, who the Russians want to be seen as an equal to Saudi Arabia, but the Russians aren't doing the same amount of work as the Saudis. In last April, you all remember that the market share war, where the Saudis went ahead and they actually made all their customers take 100% of their contractual volumes, knowing that it would end up pushing the Russians out of those markets, and really left the Russian barrels stranded on the market, really punishing Russia hard for their transgression of trying to back out of the OPEC plus agreement. And that flex by the Saudis, got the Russians back to the negotiating table really fast. I mean, I think it would, from a diplomatic standpoint, is probably the most embarrassing things the Russians have seen since the loss of their eastern territories in the Brest-Litovsk agreement back after World War I. It was a quick capitulation on their part. And my big concern is when we start to see this pressure reemerging on the market, in 1Q 2022. That kind of scenario can be, back in play again. And so it's just something we have to monitor very closely. And this is the kind of hard thing about oil markets, is that you just can't put out a spot forecast one day and say, this is my prophecy for the future. You have to be on top of it every day, or else you're going to get run over.
Sounds like what happens when I go to the kitchen, sorry. Jesse, when you sit back and take a look, the Russians, and I believe it was the Iraq, kind of kept saying when the Saudis were sitting back going, we're going to go ahead and take the high road and take some of our production off. Russians kind of kept inching theirs up, and they go, hey, Novak is a tough cookie. I mean, I think he's the Prime Minister of Energy over there, and they've got, I think, 30. You have to fact check me on that. I have to fact check myself every day anyway. And 30% of their GDP is energy export, something like that, out of Russia. It's huge amount, whatever the number is. So that he's a cool cat. I mean, I wouldn't want to get into an argument with him. I mean, that whole mess. When we take a look at, we've covered a lot of your kind of stuff in here. When you take a look at hedging, what do you think is a good bet for the hedging? And tell me a little bit about your thoughts on finance and all that kind of good stuff coming around.
So producers last year, they hedged quite a bit of their forward production at much lower prices. And so this is part of the reason why so many, especially the publicly traded operators, have not raised their forward guidance for production this year. Even though we have WTI in the 60s, we should be well over break-even economics, but they locked in a large portion of their production last year at in the 40s, and so that's affecting their economics for this year. Now they haven't hedged as much for next year, but we're not really seeing a lot of pressure on the back end of the forward curve, which means you're not really selling forward. So So there is some scope for the back of the curve to come down if there's ever any concern that the market may be heading back into into an oversupply scenario. But so far they've been quiet. And also, if you look at the non-operators, the commitment of trader reports that come out every Thursday. We haven't seen them get overextended either. On the futures markets. We're right now at about 7 longs per every short. Typically when you get above 10 longs per short, you're kind of setting yourself up for a kind of a porthole type scenario where the market starts getting a little bit weak, but there's only one small window in the room for everybody to climb out of. So everybody tries selling their positions all at once, and so it causes the market to collapse. So those things don't seem to be playing out right now. We seem to have a pretty good fundamental support for flat prices, or they're up the front, prompt prices. We're going into a backwardated market, so it doesn't make sense to store barrels anymore, physical crude. So right now, all things look pretty bullish at the current moments, which is why we have confidence in our third quarter price forecast, of $68 a barrel for WTI and
so 68 is where
for Brent.
Is that where your dollar bet is, over or under at 68, somewhere in there? We're going to go high finances here, Jesse. High finances. So is that the number you're thinking about?
Yeah, for this summer. Now things start getting, like I said, a little bit weaker. I think when we get to the fourth quarter of this year, first quarter of next, we start to see the demand seasonally drop, and then get those Iranian barrels sitting on the market. So that means that there's going to be some spot volume that has to go someplace, likely back into storage again, and that's going to have an impact on the prompt.
Okay, I'm going to put you on the spot here, and the spot is, where's the Jesse Mercer crystal ball? And if we take 5 years out the road, so go ahead and have a panic attack, and then tell me, what do you think is going to happen long term with oil? I mean, you got BP trying to become a energy company, you got Shell bagging off and going this way, and then you have the Russians. I mean, it's a mess out there trying to figure all this out. You have less people doing E&P. You have everybody saying they're going green, and it's actually taking a lot of oil and carbon fuels in order to make everything green. I have no clue. So I'm just trying to ask, what are your thoughts on that mess coming around the corner in 5 years?
Yeah, I'm kind of, you can put me in the camp with the peak demanders. I'm amongst those. In the short term, up until 2025, we're still going to get that recovery in demand that we lost during the pandemic. I mentioned jet fuel, maybe sometime around late 2023. Finally, on an average basis, against 2019, sometime by 24. But we're seeing motor fuels pick back up, distillates as well. But one thing that we've really been keen to point out to folks is, going back to that PVC and plastics discussion we had earlier, is just how much more of the incremental demand we're seeing is going towards petrochemical feedstocks. By 2025, we think that you have that yearly growth in total liquids consumption. 28% of that will be from petchem feedstocks, and it continues to grow all through the next decade as well. Transportation fuels are stagnating. We have of course EVs, but there's also already planned vehicle efficiency standards that are going up. Demographic changes. People are not driving as much because they're staying home more. We got demographic issues over in China now taking into effect. Eventually, China is not going to be the engine of global oil demand that it is now. It's going to pivot over to Southeast Asia eventually. But the OECD countries, the United States, Europe, Australia, Japan, all these countries, we're kind of nearing the point now where we're just not going to grow our demand that much anymore. Because of all these different changes that are going on, in technology as well as in society. Here we are on a Zoom call. I spent the entire last year working from home, not driving my car. And so many other people are in my position as well. And of course, there were a large number of folks who didn't have that opportunity as well.
Right.
But the fact that I don't have to get on a plane anymore to do a business trip, I can just hop on a call and talk with a customer on over Zoom, and then you don't have to worry about driving there, going through their security, finding the room, getting everything set up. A lot of people are finding this more convenient now. And that's going to weigh on demand. Of course, people are going to want to go places, but it's not going to be like the good old days anymore, I think.
Oh no, I think that there is a major change. I would not want to be in the office space rental business. I think companies, even if they go to 50-50, I think office space is still going to go down. But what do you think's coming around the corner for Enverus? I mean, you guys are rock solid, running around the corner, doing everything. Any insights that you can give us? Non-disclosure, because we're going to tell nobody on this podcast. It's going to absolutely stay in the can. I'm kidding. But I mean, if you got anything coming around the corner that you want to share with us for Enverus?
We have a lot of things in the works right now. Not all of them am I able to speak on here publicly, but we're doing some very interesting things with artificial intelligence, and we're launching several new products. We have a user-defined forecasting tool for tight oil and unconventionals in Canada that pretty much lets users essentially drop in their own forward strip of prices, and it generates a forward curve based on an economic dispatch. We have an existing version of it, but the next version that's coming out is going to be well above and beyond. I happen to manage a product called OptiFlow Crude, which matches up refineries with different grades of crude oil across a myriad of pipelines and other modes of transportation across the North American continent.
Wow.
So those are some very fascinating tools there I can personally speak to, but there are certainly a great number of other things that Enverus is working on as well, including moving into electric power and renewables too, with recent acquisitions that we've made with Energy Acuity, for example.
Isn't that fun? I'll tell you what, I may have to have you back on to talk your podcast about that flow mix and everything else with your group there. So that'd be a fun conversation as well. And Jesse, it's fantastic talking to you. Jesse Mercer with Enverus. You are one sharp cat. I do appreciate it. And thank you for stopping by our Energy Newsbeat podcast. Thank you very much.
Well, it's been fun. Thanks for having me.
All right. Thanks.